Thank you.
Okay, we're waiting for a quorum of participants. Normally it takes about 5 minutes for stragglers to come in. Good morning, Cyan. Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Patricia. Good morning, Tabin. Good morning, Ellie.
Reza, you're now a co-host, so you could post the agenda if you would like. Speaking of which, here's Mr. Sam.
We'll wait for Mike to join. Good morning, Sam.
Hello, hello.
Hey, good morning, Matthew. How are you?
Good morning, Reza. Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Hey, I feel like I'm playing bingo or whack-a-mole, admitting every
I think everyone in, yeah.
bingo is nicer.
Morning, Andre.
Morning, Andre.
There we go.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, we've got a good turnout. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Well, welcome everybody. For the purpose of the recording, it's Friday, 27th of September. This is the 61st Kwaai Day. Welcome. Gosh. So my name's Reza Rassool. I'm Chair and CEO of Kwaai. Kwaai is a non-profit AI lab, and we have the mission of democratizing AI, and we implement that mission in three ways. One, by developing personal AI. That's about 80% of our activity. The rest of our activity is split between research, that's research of fundamental AI, and policy development. So welcome everybody. Today, our guest speaker is Sam Johnston. Sam leads the PyOS development, the personal AI operating system development, and you can find out more about that at pyos.org. We have a great lineup today. Myra, perhaps you can take us through the agenda. I'm presenting at the moment. The agenda slides you sent me. Perhaps you can give us a rundown on what we're going to cover today.
Sure. Hi, Reza. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I've been having issues. My internet access just went down, so I'm connecting via my phone. So, yeah, today we have Sam Johnston, our own Sam Johnston, and he will be talking about open AI and the general definition and, oh, sorry.
I got it.
Don't worry, Ruth will admit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, and then of course after that we will have our work group updates. Would love to have some time at the end to hear from new member voices, and then I believe that's it. And on to the after party if we still have one today.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Myra. Sam, switch on your camera and we can hand over to you. And I think you've got presentation rights. If not, Ruth will make you a co-host.
All right. You can hopefully hear me well there.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So let's get this presentation happening. See how the best way to do it is. Start already. I'm just running through it. Okay, here we go. So allow multiple presenters. Only one presenter can share. I'll replace the current share. It's probably what we want to do.
Yeah.
And excuse my border here. As you can see, let me get this. So I'm presenting it from the web here.
Yeah, when I saw that, I felt like I could hear like the buzzing of like that open sign.
It looks good from here, Sam.
What's that?
It looks good from here.
Okay. Okay, let me. Sorry, excuse me. Just gonna get this here. Now, if I can hide some of this. There we go. Okay, all right. So I'm here today to talk to you about lies, damned lies, and statistics on the path to a meaningful open source AI definition. Been quite a controversial topic. This deck was prepared following the Town Hall 18 of the Open Source Initiative, which finished at 1 a.m. this morning. And so I've had to incorporate quite a bit of stuff since then. It's now 10 a.m. here in Vancouver. And I'm going to try and pack a whole lot of stuff in to the 10 minutes or so, I think, that I have. Ooh, let me now. All right, so talk about open source AI. Who here saw the presentation this week where Mark Zuckerberg got up at MetaConnect and spoke about open source AI in the context of Llama by Meta? They're quite actively using this term. Most of the behemoths have kind of steered clear of open source. There's for decades now been the open source definition, which kind of says what is and what isn't open source, and people are pretty respectful of that. But for various reasons and things like the EU AI law and so on, it's quite kind of understandable that they would wrap it up in this branding. But it's quite problematic because open source actually has a meaning, and there's these 4 freedoms that we seek to protect. And in the case of Llama, you've got the ability maybe to use it. Probably that should be a question mark because there's certain use cases where you can't use it. But you certainly can't study it or modify it. You don't even know what data is in it, let alone have the ability to change it. So it wasn't always meant to be like this, right? When Meta was first released, it was released to researchers who had to apply and get access, and so a handful of us got access early on. But then it very quickly ended up on 4chan, right? And so now the cat's out of the bag. You can't put it back in. People are going to use it for spam and phishing and spear phishing and so on anyway. So you may as well kind of go and do this is 18 months ago, go and do an open source-ish kind of more like freeware kind of release. And so that's what happened, right? But you have this community license agreement which says you can only distribute it if you brand it like Llama, and you can't distribute it if you've got over 700 million users of it. So that's clearly the Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so on can't use it. I do wonder which competitor it was that has 7 million and 1 users that was kind of the cutoff for that fairly arbitrary number. But that's all in the license agreement. And then that actually refers to a terms of use or an acceptable use policy as well, which says you can't use it for things like regulated industries like finance. So if you want to go and create that new disruptive financial advisor bot for Gen Z or whatever, or Gen Alpha, you're not able to do it unless you're doing it kind of under your own license and stuff. Or if you want to talk about like Second Amendment rights and guns and things, which are not my favorite topic, but if you wanted to do that, right, there's constraints on the fields of use that you can actually deploy this stuff into. So already it's completely out the door, and the Open Source Initiative came out, did a blog post and said, like, this stuff is definitely not open source. But you also need to request access, right? There's a form, you've got to give them details and so on. And you can share it after that, and it's kind of loosening up. It used to be you had to get approval. Now it's just you have to give the information, and they're using your information to train the models. We don't know which information, but we know that it's there's no opt-out, and there's been a lot of discussion in Australia about what models, what data from private personal data that's public from Facebook and Instagram and so on is actually in the models. We just don't know, right? And there's a whole lot of other stuff like Common Crawl and things, and that we kind of have ideas. Now, when we talk about freedom and open source and really going down to these 4 freedoms, we're talking about freedom as in liberty, right? As in free as in freedom rather than free as in beer. And as we speak, there's Oktoberfest is going on, and this is the scene on the right. I kind of would rather be there than here, but here we are. So we talk about free as in freedom, not free as in beer. Open source and so on can be free. It can be charged. Maybe you're not going to pay for it if you can just download it for free. But the real key thing is that we've got to kind of work out what the freedoms are that we want to protect. This guy here, Reza Rassool, decades ago was having trouble with things like printer drivers and not being able to control hardware that they own. And so came up with, and he was actually one of the authors of the GNU General Public License. But based on the free software definition, which defines these 4 essential freedoms, which are the ability to use a system, to study a system, to modify a system, and then to share a system, right? If you don't have those 4 essential freedoms, because it says that, you know, people over 6 feet can't use it, or that you don't have the source code, or that you can have the source code but you can't change it, or there's other restrictive licenses, then there is actually a process of the Open Source Initiative, which is another 501c3 nonprofit, that they assess which licenses are valid, and if they support the 4 freedoms and protect the 4 freedoms, then away you go. Now, in the context of AI, we need to think about what needs to be protected. It's not just source code, there's other things, there's weights and there's data, right? And the process pretty quickly identified these 3 things, right? And we talk about the preferred form, right? You can't issue your source code on punch cards in Japanese and say, well, you know, there's the source code. It's got to be in the preferred form, which is a downloadable source code or something like this, right? And okay, so now we've got this, like, let's just license that using an existing open source or open data license, and we're good, right? And if we test that definition, we can use it, study it, modify it, and share it. Now, you wouldn't think it'd be a very controversial thing. But then in the current draft, which is soon to be going to become the release candidate 1, which actually I guess yesterday it did, now talks about metadata, so data information, the data set, or detailed information used to train the system. So detailed information about the data set, but not the data, right? So if I've got something which has been trained on a set of data and I want to remove, for example, all of the not suitable for work content so that I can deploy it as a library bot or an academic bot or like our prior system, then I can't because I don't have the data. The best I can do is fine tune it, which is kind of modification, but not unrestricted modification, or I can wrap it in a filter and things like that. But the freedom to modify is not protected. So I'm like, you know, where did this come from? Like the what? The data information? So that's a really quite kind of confusing term. And if we go back and retest the definition, well, you can use it and share it, but you certainly can't study or modify it except in, you know, fairly limited. You can't check for biases and this kind of things very easily if you don't have access to the data to work out how the thing was trained. Now, this is where the dragons are. And old maps used to have these symbols like dragons be here be dragons. You know, this is a danger area. And so when you start going in and start trying to define things like these kind of weasel words saying data information, right, you get into trouble. And what we're certainly seeing is that there is trouble in terms of how do we define data information, right? I'm just going to mute that because it keeps dinging in the background. I'll turn it down a little bit. And you end up contorting yourself into these kind of knots and saying like sufficiently detailed information about the data used to train the system so that a skilled person, which is a legal term in the context of patents, by the way, can recreate a substantially equivalent system using the same or similar data. So it's like Facebook saying, all right, well, Meta saying we use all of this public data on Facebook. We didn't even scrape it because it's in our databases, which is a bit of a pointless point to make, but they have, right? So we're now saying, well, okay, what's data information and how do we define data information? And critically, if you've got this kind of litmus test, like the open source definition, like how do you apply it? Because I can just come and say, well, I'm Meta and I've got Llama and here's how we did it. And you know, if you had access to this information, you could do it as well, but you don't, right? Because you're not us. It's kind of like giving me a recipe that's calling for like unicorn eggs and saying like, go and make it, right? You can't, right? It's kind of, it's not, doesn't, there's nothing you can do. You don't have the ingredients, right? So those freedoms are not protected. A lot of people have raised this in the process and in the discussion, right? So I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Now, they do accept, right, that data is useful and important. But then there's all these excuses about like, you know, there's lung cancer, and if you take a photo of a lung, then, you know, to train a model, then because of the blood vessels and so on in there, it's like a fingerprint, especially identifiable, and so, you know, this can never be released as a model. Well, you know, if I get lung cancer, I decide to share my stuff, then I can, right? I mean, I've had my DNA's been at 23andMe for 20 years or something, and I've just deleted it now because they're going private. But I had it out there so that it can contribute to medical research. And like, if there's no incentive to create these data sets, then they're not going to be created. So they've kind of said like, we'd like you, it's like preferred or something, it's encouraged or whatever, but it's not required. And if it's not required, then you're like, well, that's kind of really weird because you kind of either it's there or it's not, right? It's got to be a binary litmus test. You can't kind of have like a an open source light, right? Or maybe you can, right? And maybe that's one of the solutions, but that's not what they've done. So they've had this big process, and there's been events, and there's been all these different people have been invited in, and they've had workshops, and they've whiteboarding and discussions and votes and all this other stuff called this co-design process all over the world, right? And they've used, like, we dig a little bit deeper, we go to the opensource.org and we have a look. Okay, so there's all this stuff here about how will we define open source AI. There's a process, we're going to do this stuff, the board's decided to do this thing. Now, by the way, they spent almost 20 years now without doing anything about cloud, right? And so cloud, when we moved from product to service, it undermined all of the open source licenses. And 18 years ago, I moved to France to work on cloud and standardization and so on. And we still don't have like an open cloud definition. But ChatGPT was released in November, like not even 2 years ago. And already this is like a hair on fire emergency to solve it. So we're going to do this co-design thing, and we're going to outsource this and so on. And we're going to come and have this this working group, and we're going to have like DEI, and that's great. And by the way, I do approve of that. I'm not trying to be facetious here. And they voted. I'm like, oh, they voted. We don't vote on things like IETF standards. We use rough consensus because voting doesn't really work. And then we're like, oh, well, so if any component like training data gets more than 2 times the mean, then we're going to require it. And if not, like, we're going to maybe require it, like lean yes, and then we're maybe not, and then we're just not, right? So I was like, well, it seemed a bit arbitrary. Like, normally we look at things like variance, and I'm not even a statistician, but I've done enough stats to know that we look at things like variance, and you might look at the number of standard deviation units from the norm and this kind of stuff. But okay, so we've chosen these numbers. Okay, well, all right, we got this. We did a component list. We took votes. We compiled the votes. We did a recommendation report. And then we created a checklist of what is required to be open source AI and what's not required. All right. So looks good, right? You'd think that ends up with a useful, well, they're not going to create a 2-legged stool. It's going to be a 3-legged stool. It's going to function. It's not going to be a car with no wheels. And we go in, and sure enough, they've got all this voting data here, and they've published this, right? And this is like the 30th tab or something in the spreadsheet that they've published for transparency and auditability. And they've got the initials in here for the individual voters, which is good because it allows us to actually go and have a look at what's going on. And so I did. I'm like, well, that's a bit confusing because all these discussions in like discuss.opensource.org are all saying like you need the data. And every practitioner that's looked at this kind of that I've seen has said like, no, you kind of need the data to be able to exercise these freedoms. And so I've got the data. And I've taken that spreadsheet and I've flattened all the votes out and tallied them up, and I've done a heat map to see where the votes are and where they're not. And then I've ended up saying, well, look, it's kind of saying two mu is not really a very scientific way to do it, and it's not that we should be voting anyway, but we're voting, huh? So let's roll with it. Let's use k-means clustering, and here in the bottom right we've got k-means clustering with n equals 5. And it kind of starts to look a little bit more useful, right? It's like, yes, lean, yes, maybe, lean, no, no. And if we go to n equals 2, we kind of get this like fairly big step in the middle, and we got like the greens is what you included and the reds is what you don't. Now, this still doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like saying that you're, in French, they have a cake, the caca, which is where you have 4 different, like, what is it? Milk, eggs, flour, and sugar, I think it was like pound cake in English. Right, you can't vote out the butter because you don't want like the butter. You're not going to have a cake, right? You put that in the oven, you're not going to have a cake. So they're kind of like trying to vote out components, the critical components to a functional litmus test for open source AI. But if we accept that that's the process and we apply the votes, like and do statistics on the votes, we'll come out with like pretty big step in the middle. We're going to be like, all right, well, we need training data. Obviously, you need the inference code, right? The parameters, but you need the training data sets and the testing data, probably useful as well. You need documentation, and you need, if there's any research papers, we kind of want to know what's going on here. But maybe you don't need like the training code, or you don't need the data cards and evaluation data and various other things. All right. Sounds like we've got a workable definition here. So I go back and say, here's a workable definition. So no, thanks for that. I like your charts, by the way. But did you count the negative votes, the not necessary votes, which count for -1? Now, if that's not the most anti-democratic thing I've ever heard, it's kind of like saying, right, you're going to go and vote for Trump, and I'm going to go and vote for Harris, and I'm not American, so I don't get to vote anyway. But and then you grab my vote and tear it up quietly. I mean, it's just not acceptable. It's kind of what happens, but it's not acceptable, right? It's clearly just not democratic, right? And then, sure, one of the major drawbacks of sharing the data is that people can see who voted for what. All right, well, let's go and have a look then. What's going on here? I'm like, this is not that we should be using democracy, but this is not democracy. So I'm going to have, how do you have negative votes, right? I mean, you've got in the data section, you've got code, data, and models, and then other stuff. There's all these negative votes. And you go have a look, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's this guy who's just like, at every chance, he's like voted against requiring the data. Not so interested above, right? But the data is like, absolutely not, we're not having the data. So then you go and have a look at who these people are. And it's like, we got Meta in the working group for Llama. And apparently, because who better to know about what's going on in Llama than Meta, we've invited not one, but two Meta employees. And the guy who's voting against requiring the data is a lawyer from Meta. And we're like, okay, that's kind of a bit strange for like an open source, 501c3 nonprofit kind of has the, and not to say, and the reason I blacked out the names here is this is not, at best, these people genuinely believe what they're doing, at worst, they're doing the job, right? And so it's not an individual concern, it's a process concern. These people probably should never have been in the room. To the extent they should have been in the room, they should have been accompanied by a whole lot of other people, right? And it should have been a discussion about the technical merits, right? And finding a rough consensus rather than like even a straw poll to determine what to include and what not. It's like, hey, let's make a car with no wheels, like this designed by committee thing, right? It doesn't work. But critically, the final report for the working group doesn't mention anything about these negative votes. So they've tallied up and made a decision based on the negative votes that don't appear in the report for the working group and do appear on like the 30th tab or something of the spreadsheet that they shared for transparency. So I'm like, okay, well, how did you make the decision? So I go back and trawl through the different threads, and it's like, well, we drew the line after likely required, right? I was kind of leaning yes. So maybe required and down and not required. If you look at the votes in the spreadsheet linked to the post, there's a pretty big drop off between data pre-processing code and the data sets and documentation, the maybe category. And that's because there's all of these negative votes, right? These anti-democratic negative votes in there. And if you take those out, then you end up with a fairly useful, workable set of data to protect the four freedoms. And this pretty clear step off here. Remember, this is k-means clusters with n equals 2. So it's like binary. So yes and yes or no. No point having n equals 3, 4, or 5. So I said, right, n equals 2. And sure enough, there's a pretty big step in the middle as you'd expect. It's not 50-50 or it's not, but it's there and it's clear that research papers should be in and validation data sets should be out. So, all right, let's have a big discussion all week. And then culminating in this talk last night at midnight, which is the 18th town hall that they've hosted. And this is hosted by the executive director of the OSI, because the rest of them are in, the others were leading the work are in Buenos Aires for the NDLA conference, where they announced yesterday, by the way, the release candidate of draft 0.0.9, which is the one that I showed you, which has got all the problems, right? So the admission last night was that the results were never meant to be not scientific, nor representative, nor democratic, or anything like that. So we're out there saying that this is a democratic process. We've got all these people in a room, we're experts, and we're counting their votes, and we're using all these statistics to come up with the solution. So you should rely on it. We've got all these endorsers here, which is a vanity metric if I've ever seen one. But then saying they're not even using the information they've collected anyway. So I'm like, oh, that's really, really quite strange. And so they've summarized my concern as basically that the co-design process is not democratic, ultimately unfair, voting should not have been used, the selection of volunteers was biased, and results didn't show any consensus and many other issues, right? So they basically said, look, this is, all right, we got your concern, here it is, summarizes all of this stuff, we're not going to do anything about it. And sure enough, this is the release candidate one, and as you can see, barely, right, they're kind of saying, well, the definitions, and half the definitions here are a bit like, let's talk about models versus weights, which is a bit pointless in these clarifications. But they're saying the definitions aren't going to change, but what is likely to change is the preferred form to make modifications to a machine learning system. But as has been rightly raised by one of the another open school old guard who's already capitulated, is that the the public post appeal to the board to like, hey, can you please like look at this, because we don't vote this through, because like once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in, right? Once you've said to people they don't need to share the data, they don't need to share the data. You can't then come and say you got to share the data. But what you can do is you say you got to share the data, and then you find out, okay, there's not enough systems, or the claim was that there were no systems that would meet a definition that required you to share the data. And you could loosen it up, but you can't go the other way, right? So this is a real serious problem in terms of a functional litmus test, and it requires the organization to go and assess, with practitioners, like $1 million a year practitioners, to assess whether or not they could implement these things or have people self-certify. And the most likely thing is people are going to self-certify, and they're going to say, yeah, well, a sufficiently experienced person or whatever could implement the thing based on this if they had access to the unicorn eggs to do it, right? So it's just not functional in terms of protecting the 4 freedoms, right? And some people just like to watch the world burn. What they are doing is they're adding an FAQ entry where they talk about the different types of data. And this, I'll give them some credit. There is actually issues with data, right? So you've got open training data, you've got public training data, which is kind of maybe problematic. Like Common Crawl, you don't get a license, you don't get like a Creative Commons license. You get terms of use, like you can download it from Amazon, AWS, or Open Data, but you're not being assigned a license to use code that somebody else had on their website. But if you're only going to use like a tiny little, 1 millionth of 1% of that thing to produce some output, right? It's like somebody who looks at like a Picasso or whatever, they can't not like absorb a bit of that style and then have it reflected in their work, whether they want to or not, right? It's kind of, but you're not going to see it, but they do learn from it. It's how we as humans, if we have a human condition, you learn from what you see. Then you've got this obtainable training data. The example of this would be like, so public training data, YouTube transcripts, they're out there, you can't use them. They're kind of the copyright is shared between Google and the user, or owned by the user and licensed to Google, or whatever it is, right? Doesn't matter. But you don't have access to it, and technically you can't crawl it because it's, you'll get blocked and whatever else, and you'll be against the terms of use. Then there's obtainable training data. And one of the big reasons why GPT-5 is going to be so expensive is because they got to do things like buy, they got sued because GPT was creating New York Times articles or things that look like New York Times articles. And so they got sued by the New York Times. And now, you could buy the New York Times articles, right, for a fee, and who knows what the fee is going to be, but it's not really open source, right? It's kind of, you got to, open source is free as in beer, whereas now we're saying there's going to be a very significant, potentially multi-billion-dollar cost. And then you got this unshareable non-public data, which is like, personally identifiable information, like the lung cancer screenings, right? And maybe we just don't have the lung cancer model as open source, right? Maybe it's available as kind of freeware, but not open, right? So I get that there is issues, but if you don't have the data, you can't exercise the 4 freedoms. But if you do have data, even if it's problematic data, it's not like your purest CC4 license or whatever, right? But it's the Common Crawl data, right? And there's the Common Crawl Foundation, which is 501c3. They've got a process to remove copyright claims and so on, and it's available. It's hosted on AWS. It's part of their public data set stuff. So like it's accessible, and as long as it's accessible, you can have you can practice the ability to study and modify a system that's built on it. But if it's not accessible, right, because it's like Facebook saying we've trained our staff on Facebook posts, well, it's not. They may be public, but they're not accessible to you. They're the unicorn eggs that I referred to before. I am getting close to the end here, so fear not. I've taken more than my 10 minutes. It would have been remiss of me not to include Karsten's suggestion here that we have this kind of open source AI D+, D-, right? And kind of say, well, look, you got the data, you can release the data, you must release the data. There you go, you're up in the top right quadrant. But if you've got the data and you can't release the data, or you don't want to release the data, so you can't release the data because it's like PII or GDPR or whatever is going to stop you from, or HIPAA or whatever it is going to stop you from releasing it. Well, then or your Llama, your Facebook, you don't want to release it. So you get the kind of this like integrity exception, which is meant to be like a, I guess, a pejorative term, and there's history of doing that, right? We said we have the library or the lesser GPL, which you now call a library GPL, which was so that you could link to things that aren't open source as just a pragmatic kind of, this is not going to work if we don't do it, so we're going to do it, right? We're not going to be able to build an open source operating system if we don't have exceptions. And there were exceptions for binary blobs and things for drivers, and so that's basically what Carson's getting to here. I personally don't think it overcomplicates things a little bit. I kind of feel like you need to have like the full fat open source AI, and then maybe like an inference only or like a light version or something like this. But I think it would be quite problematic to say, you know, there's different grades of kind of free versus open weights versus open source. No, that's too confusing. So this is where we are. They've announced the RC1 yesterday. They're going to take it to a board vote. It's going to get voted on, and then it's going to be announced as version 1.0. You know, unless we get hit by a meteor, I think that's going to happen. I think on the 28th of October next month. Version 1.0. You know, here's your open source AI definition. So that's where we're at. I don't really know what to do about it. I think that probably if we did have a minute or two, or we can come back at the end maybe, or push it to the after party, have a discussion about that. I'm quite shocked that they've kind of come out and admitted that their democratic process, this co-design process that was purported and to be and parroted as democratic, as now they've admitted is totally undemocratic. Now, I believe it shouldn't be democratic anyway, right? I mean, creating standards, it's meant to be consensus. Rough consensus is ideal, like what they use at the Internet Engineering Task Force. But I don't know. I mean, we're at a bit of an impasse here, because a lot of the people are saying in the community, on like discuss.opensource.org, are saying like this doesn't function. It's, you know, it's a car with no wheels if you don't require the training data. So what do? Do you say, okay, well, do we have another organization come up with a definition? Do we move to another term? Do we what do we do as an industry so that projects like the Personal Artificial Intelligence Operating System, PyOS, and other projects that Kwaai is working on can have the benefit of differentiating themselves against, you know, clearly not open source competitors? Now, to be clear, you know, Llama is an amazing piece of technology. They've really, and 3.2 is really awesome. You should have a look at it. The smaller models are great. Multimodal stuff is great. But nobody says everything has to be open source, right? If they don't want to open source it, that's their prerogative. The problem with Meta and with Mark's keynote earlier this week is that they chose to go out and say this is open source for probably quite pragmatic business reasons relating to the EU AI Act and so on. But it does muddy the water for us, you know, trying to make open source AI mean something. All right, I've done enough talking. I'm now 25 minutes into a 10-minute talk. Hopefully that was useful and somebody learned something somewhere.
Sam, thanks so much. Let's open it up for one or two questions, but I recommend that we go deeper into this in the after party. So anyone got any burning questions that they want to ask? Hands up. And I don't know how you put your hand up in this thing. It's in the react button. Okay. That button where you go.
Hey,
Send
I'm just demonstrating. It's down
Yeah.
at the bottom in the
Right.
heart.
Okay, in the heart. Okay. And if not, we can have those questions in the after party. And thanks so much, Sam, for being on top of this. I think it's important. I'm not sure what we can do about it. We can make a noise, but frankly, you know, our noise is not that big. We're not a loudmouth in the open source community, so it's gonna be tough. I think though it's important to state your position, and you've been bold and you've been clear about it on LinkedIn. Let's Doc, you've sailed this road before so many times.
Oh my God. I'm sorry I came late. Just dealing with stuff here. Have any of us talked with Simon Phipps?
WebMink. I wanted to, you know, I thought to do that, but like I said, this is kind of hours old, right? And I managed to get a couple of hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he's an old friend and colleague, and I don't think he's with the open source initiative, or right now anyway. Whether he is or not, he's always a sensible head. He's one of those people who is, very morally fibrous, but at the same time, sensible about things. So it'd be great to talk with him. It's again, you're way ahead of me on all of this. I don't. It sounds despairing.
Yeah, I kind of thrown myself in front of the train here, thinking that, wow, I found this kind of, it's accidental maybe, right? But that this kind of voting mechanism was flawed. And I thought they might have come back and said, oh yeah, okay, cool. So the data actually meant something else and misinterpreted it, fine. But they're like, well, actually, no, we never intended for that to be democratic. So that's the part that I think, I'd be interested. If you wouldn't mind contacting Simon,
No, I'll do it. I'll
but-
contact Simon.
Yeah,
I'll
please
contact
do.
Simon.
So, we heard this talk. I can give you a link to the talk, and you can take that to me.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Doc. And thanks, Sam. Let's get us back on track. And I think we can go forward with the work group updates, and I'm sharing, I hope. If not, let's share and just get the agenda up. And I think it's Balaji and Cyan who are going to talk about the progress made on the Pi Assistant.
So Reza, let me jump out of the way here. I mean, most of this week I've been focused on this. You were on the call yourself. You saw I've been working on bringing in the PRs in PiOS. A lot of the stuff with the assistant has kind of gone a bit, made decisions that belong in an application, not in the OS. Like, we're going to use Olama, we're going to use this and that and the other. So I'm looking at how to deal with that, and kind of we'll incorporate their input over time, and then they'll hopefully incorporate, start to use the APIs that we support, like for personas, for example. But then the other stuff we're working on, we do have a really critical one, which is to integrate the passkey authentication that Robert did, and then also I've been working on the key vault, the config management system, which is all encrypted, and I'm moving to JSON, so you can store whatever you want in there, and then starting to add things like the personas and stuff. So that's basically the update from me.
Thanks so much, Sam. So look, two key milestones. One is to be able to get the platform up and running in iBridge, and I know you're working with Jeff Kramer to help that happen, and that'll allow this internal team to kick the tires on building your own bot, and we'll probably should be in that mode for a week or two before we release to the beta applicants who are champing at the bit to get access to the code. Some of them have already taken the POC code, which is the stuff we developed back in Q1, and they're working on that because they couldn't wait. So look, there's a real demand out there. Let's hear from Cyan and Balaji on what their progress is.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So the progress that we have made so far, we delivered like 2 weeks ago the initial phase for the Pi Assistance MVP. Users are able to create personas, to attach a persona to your assistant, get context of how the persona will answer the questions that you're asking based on the personality that you provided, and uploading multiple documents. For this week, we were focused on fixing bugs. We had a few bugs regarding multiple documents that are too large with a lot of information. Sometimes the indexes were not being collected correctly. Basically, we were focused on enhancing everything that we have made so far, making it more stable, and adding more placeholders so users know exactly what each field represents. Like, we just had a description, which is the persona's personality, but we didn't have like a placeholder to indicate what this field does. So we were more focused on fixing bugs and enhancing the user experience. Also, we enhanced some the statuses on when you ask a question. We now provide feedback to the user regarding what is happening in the back end, so users know exactly that your assistant is actually thinking, looking for the files, etc., etc. The other thing that we worked on is when you upload files, we didn't have like a status or anything. The files were just being uploaded through a loading bar. But now we have some feedback of what the status, when we're creating the vectors, when we're storing the vectors, etc., etc. So basically, it's more of a user experience. And we're starting to focus on sharing your assistant. Now that you can create your own assistant, have it answer your questions based on your documents, and have different contexts on each individual assistant, now we need to start sharing it with other users. So that's where we're at right now. We hope that on Tuesday we can share, we can show you guys a really good demo with a better user experience and a better user interface.
Fantastic. So for anyone that's interested in seeing that, come to the Tuesday Pi Assistant Working Group meeting, and you can get a sneak peek of what the progress looks like. Thanks so much, Cyan. And I really appreciate all the effort from the whole Arcus Nexus team. Like, this is Arcus Nexus has been a major supporter of the Kwaai initiative, donating half a dozen developers to us. And we've been both organizations have been learning AI. Frankly, we didn't even have the vocabulary to even express what we wanted to do, and together both teams have built up centers of excellence in AI. And I'm really pleased to see this type of synergy. We've got similar collaborations with other industry participants, other industry partners. That includes iBridge and Swiss Vault, who are helping provide the hardware, the infrastructure, the data center hosting for our development. So thanks so much. Without your input, I don't think we'll be where we are today. Great. Okay, just to keep on track, Myra, I see your camera is back on. Are you're not okay? Okay, look, let me continue with the agenda. This is the lineup, and look, it's me. It's talking about grant applications. So let me give you a quick snapshot of what we are doing. Here's our grant application funnel. Okay, look, it's a nice number here, but that's a funnel. A funnel has a conversion rate, and if the conversion rate is 10%, then okay, that could be an expectation of what you might get if you apply for all these grants. So there's a high probability of failure in these grants. It's extremely competitive. Most of the grants are from federal organizations. You see NSF, National Science Foundation, NIH, you see NEH, and a few others. There's also Mozilla and California Learning Labs over here. You can see the status of these applications: 2 rejected, 2 aborted, and we've got 5 in progress, in flight. So let's call it on these. This changes status now to aborted. And
Are you sharing your screen?
I think I am. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, it's just me. I'm having issues today.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a
So here we are, and we're midway through this application here, the 24585, and we were going to apply for 3 tracks. Here's what the application looks like. The call for proposals is on technology that'll be privacy preserving data sharing in practice. So what does that mean? Well, the problem that AI poses to most of us is that in order to use the AI, you have to divulge your personal information to it, either in the form of a prompt or in the form of context documents that you'll send up to AI. There is no technology currently that will allow you to do that while ensuring that the service operator doesn't see your data in clear text. And the obvious fear that you have is that if that is intensely private data, you're worried about sharing it with entities that probably don't have your best interests at heart. So NSF calls for innovations that will help secure that type of service so that you're not revealing your data to it. And within Kwaai, we feel we have a solution for it. And so we are submitting to track 1. And the submission, the due date is today at 5 o'clock. And I want to thank all those that have contributed to making the grant application happen. I feel good about our track 1 application. Track 2 and track 3 were maybe a bridge too far. So I'll be working really hard on this. I'll be reaching out to 1 or 2 of you. I've reached out to Cam, to Dave Grantham, to Ryan, to provide some additional docs. And I think we can submit by 5 o'clock today. I'm gonna in fact submit at 3 o'clock today. I also want to thank Ankita for helping doing all of the accounting and the modeling for building out the budget for the grant application. It is extremely painful, but it's a pain you actually only have to incur once. The pain is in dealing with a half a dozen federal platforms where you have to go and create your account at each of them. And it takes a while before the one platform can speak to the other and recognize that you have an account. We've gone through that hurdle. And now filling in subsequent grant applications with deadlines that are not today, but later on, is going to be easier and easier. So we'll develop, as I said, this muscle memory for submitting grant applications. This is at least my cursory scan of available federal grants. We're now subscribers to any new grants requests for proposals that come up, and so I'll add that to the funnel. If any of you come across other charitable organizations or grant funding sources that are putting out requests for proposals or funding opportunities, let's add that to the funnel. We also spoke to Christiane Randieri from our EMEA chapter, and we'll be doing the same thing for European grants. And the funding there for AI for Good is very strong. And so we'll be going through those processes to make sure that we can start applying for those. Have a look at the grants. You can go and search them yourselves at grants.gov or any of the other sources. Grants.gov is a good place to go and search. If there's anything that you want to apply for yourself, or you want Kwaai to apply on your behalf, so a fellowship to just pay for your research, that'll be great. If you want to participate in any of these projects that we've earmarked here, let me know, and we can look at writing you into the budget as a line item. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there. I think we're at 9 minutes from the end. Let's hear from some new voices. And as usual, if you don't put your hand up, you know I'm going to call on you. Oh, and I like the way that Zoom lists everyone in alphabetical order. Okay. So I'm going to call on a few people. Asha, we've not heard from you. Perhaps you'll introduce yourself to the community.
Sure. I'm just I used to work out in Silicon Valley for a number of years, mostly in the South Bay, and then moved up to North Bay, and then now I live out in Idaho. So I'm near the University of Idaho. Very interested in AI, what's going on, kind of at the frontier of all the kinds of questions that people have. And I guess I'm mostly interested in studying the Earth. So I use AI for that kind of thing, and then just wanted to get to know everybody here. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Asha. Okay. Matt,
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, Matt's got his hand up. Okay.
Hello, Reza, you mind let me share my screen super quick?
Sure. Who's got the
Do a quick announcement here. Tomorrow, on Saturday, for those that are based in EMEA, we are doing a conference with Abdul Rahman Babatunde, who's been a long time Kwaai member. Abdul Rahman's company, Prompt 2, is putting on a conference, and here we go. And there's Abdul Rahman. Prompt 2 is putting on a conference here called AI for All. Really, looking at bringing the community in West Africa. He's based in Kano, Nigeria. Really looking to bring the community together. Abdul Rahman has been a long time, proponent of inclusive technology and technology to combat poverty and to raise people up in technology education. So Reza, myself, and Christian will be speaking. I think Reza, you're on first at about 3:30 your time in the morning. So that'll be a fun early morning for us all. I'll be speaking on trust in AI, talking about some AI ethics around ownership, transparency, accountability, fairness, inclusiveness, and of course, trust. So if you can make it, or if folks in the EMEA time zone where it's not quite as absurdly early in the morning, definitely let them know. And I'll share this post here with a registration link in the chat.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks for touting that. I'd forgotten I need to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Set the alarm.
Right, that's what alarms are for. Okay, let's see who else. I see names, but I don't see faces on there. So I see Pinar. If you're the Pinar from Life Sciences, that's great. We haven't heard from you, but if not, you're someone new, and then we want to hear from you. And Justin, we'd like the community to hear from you as well.
And Shani, I don't know who that person is.
Right.
Hi. Lisa, if you...
Yeah, this is
Sorry.
Shani. Hi, everyone. I don't share my camera. I'm like an exploded washing machine. I have a cold, so please forgive me for that. So I have been the way I want to introduce myself, I don't know if this is the right format, but please forgive me. I have been in product for the past 10 years. I worked on an AI-enabled productivity tool last year. I had an exit, not a fancy one, earlier this year. And I'm just exploring the community to see what is happening, learn from you, and contribute where I can.
Thank you so much, Shani. And Shani, have you signed up at Kwaai.ai to become a member? You can get access to Slack.
Not yet. I connected with you a couple of days ago via LinkedIn. I think we both attended an online virtual session, and I reached out. I got this invitation. I was really curious to join in and listen in. I will definitely follow the steps and sign up.
Fantastic.
Only because we'd like to have you attend our office hours, and then that way you can find the right group to participate in. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, there are a few more new names on the call. So Justin, we spoke to you briefly before the call started, but I'm sure the community would like to know more about you and what you're doing.
Reza, that Justin has he's gone back into his conference, unfortunately, but there is another Justin here. But Justin Hunt.
There's so many Justins.
Yes.
Sorry, I was like, wait, should I drop off? Just yeah, I got connected to Kwaai through Doc Searles and some surveillance capitalism kind of community activation there. I think I met you, what is it, like about 6 months ago at that. Well, I tuned in on that and saw your presentation there. And so I've been slowly just kind of getting involved. I just recently
worked with an IP attorney on a local first blockchain implementation. And so I'm very interested in hybrid RAG for actually enabling AI, because I think a combination, of course, the average vector database for RAG enablement is just, of course, standard and easy and key. But then with graph and now with hashed, just intelligent chunks, we can, I think, combine that all together to create some really powerful enablement on.
Justin, that's in the bullseye of what we're looking at. So RAG, graph RAG, distributed graph RAG, where you shard the database across multiple nodes. Obviously encrypted graph RAG, because you want to make sure that each of those nodes, the connection is secure. And so that's right in the bullseye of what we're working on. Come and join the movement. Sign up at Kwaai.ai. We'll get you connected to a work group, and we'd love your participation.
Cool. So I'll do the sign up on Slack and join that today, and then just to add a little bit more as far as private, I wish I was part of the grant, because I do, I worked at a differential privacy startup, years ago in Silicon Valley, and I just, absolutely bring those together.
There are a few more grants that with due dates in October, November, and December. So let's have a conversation. We'll see which ones we can hook you up with.
All right, thanks,
that'd be fantastic. Okay. I'm curious to know who Zoom user is. It's an anonymous user right at the end of the list. Go on.
Is that me?
It could be you. Yeah.
I don't know if it's let's see.
It's you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hi, my name is Nikos. I might be the youngest person here. I'm 27 or almost 27, 26, almost 27. And from the quick dialogue that you guys had here.
How old do we look, Nico?
Huh?
How old do we look?
Oh, sorry. Okay, never mind.
In our heads, we're 21.
Okay.
Ruth, is that your age behind you? No.
Oh,
so sorry.
Oh.
It's not. Okay.
Derailed.
Carry on.
So from the quick dialogue that you guys had, that seems to confirm that I've kind of come to a place that's sort of aligned with my interests. I wasn't really sure. I just found you guys on Meetup, and I was like, why not just jump on and see what this is about. So I think I ended up finding this from learning about federated learning, and I think there's I forgot what group it is, but Meta has some kind of course that they're building for like federated learning and related topics, and like the last one, the one that was seemingly to me like most interesting and most impactful. It's like they started during COVID and it hasn't been published. So I was like, oh, what's going on there? I was like, I want to know. I want to know why this course doesn't exist. Is it because of lack of knowledge, lack of kind of a method, or were they like, oh, we don't want to be associated with this, it's too like revolutionary. And then so I guess I'm really curious about how what you guys are working on can kind of interface with social media, because I saw that like all the social media companies that have some kind of LLM features or functionality, it's like heavily sandboxed. It's not connected to the data, and I understand why they would want to do that. But to me, it seems like a really big opportunity to use these tools as a UI, an interface to do things, to, for example, your feed, to specify what social media feed you would like to see, and then another step would be to have dynamic permissions to be able to share or not share that with other people on the social media system. So it seems like it just doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon with the big social media companies. So that's what made me curious about things like Lens Protocol, and so I'm wondering, yeah, and maybe like Nostr as well. I'm wondering if the kind of like more cutting edge decentralized social media ideas can connect with what you guys are working on. That's what I'm interested in.
Thanks so much. So my message to you is sign up at Kwaai.ai and we'll get you connected to the right work group.
Okay.
And so you can see.
Yeah, I'm working on exactly this stuff.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, look, I posted in the chat the coordinates for the after party. Unfortunately, it's on sucky Google Meet. I just love Zoom. Let me tell you what's going on with Zoom. We have a non-profit Zoom account in application at the moment. I'm told it's still another 10 days away, but then we can start moving all of our stuff over to Zoom. Great. See you at the after party at the Kwaai Weekly Idea Exchange, which started 4 minutes ago. People waiting to get in.
Yes. All the new people are welcome.
Thanks, all. See you there.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Doc, I gave you the link there. And anyone else who wants to.
Thank you, Sam. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.